Hello, it's Alex and welcome to the Geeks Table. So this is a MacBook running Davinci Resolve. And this is an iPad running Davinci Resolve. And how great it would have been if we could open the same Davinci project on both of them, and while I edit a video timeline, someone could do the color grading, and the files would be in sync. Or I could open a chat on my iPad, write a message, and someone on the Mac could reply. And if it were for free. And you've guessed it, we can do that. And today I'll show you how. We shall use the software called Studio Server by WIreBear, and if you'll find it useful, I would really suggest you to support them via donation. And just for the record, I'm not affiliated with them, I just love the product and feel the need to share it with you. We shall use a Synology NAS to host our Studio Server, but if you wish to use any other NAS or even a dedicated Linux machine, the steps will be more or less similar. Feel free to use the chapters to switch between the steps, and let's jump right into it. So the idea is that we will have our project hosted on a local server, and we shall connect to it from the iPad and the MacBook. And each device will have its own copy of the media files. Of course, you can host them on the server too, but in this tutorial we don't really care about the location of the media, only the location of the project files. First of all, if you have a Synology NAS, let's make sure that it supports running Docker containers. In order to do so, let's switch to our DSM, open the Package Center, and search for the Container Manager. If you have it here, then your NAS supports running Docker containers. If you have an older NAS, you can also go to the Package Center. And as you can see, it doesn't have a container manager, but we can search for Docker. And it's basically the same, just a different logo and a different name. If you don't have both Docker and container manager, go to this link, it will be in the description, and it describes how to install Docker on unsupported Synology NAS stations. And there is a huge list of models that support this workaround. If your Synology NAS doesn't support running Docker container, or you don't have a Synology NAS but you wish to have one, I really encourage you to go to the second-hand market, because there are plenty of options which are quite affordable but yet mighty. So before we move on to the next step, you should ask yourself a question. Do you need to access your Davinci Resolve server from outside of your local network? Imagine that your coworker needs to work from home, or you yourself need to tweak the project when you're on the go. If the answer is yes, then we need an access to our router to do the port forwarding. So let's switch to our DSM first. Let's go to the control panel, network, and it will show us the IP of our router that we can access. Also, if we switch to the network interface, it will show us the IP address of our DSM that we will need later. So let's make a note of that. Router IP is this one. DSM is this one. All right. Now let's create a new tab and open our router. Now I understand that all routers are different, and I obviously don't know where the port forwarding is located for you, but I'm pretty sure that you know how to Google things. Anyway, it's usually called just port forwarding, and the UI is usually very similar to what I have here. So we need to create a few rules here. When we click on the plus, it will show us this window. Let's make it a bit smaller because we'll need our notes. Let's give it a name saying Davinci port 1. The IP address will be the DSM IP address. If you don't have the name option, it doesn't matter. We don't really need it. It's just for the ease to understand what this rule is about. Now here we will switch to the port because we need just one port to map. And here we will use this port 50059, and it will translate to the same port 50059. And let's make a note of it. Davinci port 1, 50059. Okay, let's apply. Let's create another one. Do Davinci port 2, put the same IP address that we've used. We need just one port. And this time it will be 8543. And let's make a note of it as well. Okay, click apply. And last but not least, let's create Davinci port number 3. Use the same IP address, just one port. And here it will be 5432. 5432. And of course, we'll make a note of it as well. Now it's important to say that for Davinci port 1 and Davinci port 2, you have to use exactly these ports, because these are the ports that Davinci server relies on. As for the third port, you can use any port that you like. I will use this number because this number is used by the developer in their tutorials, and I will just reuse it. Okay, let's click apply, turn on all these rules, and click apply. Okay, and here's the thing. We need to use our container manager, or the Docker, basically the same thing, different name, to manage the containers. But the trick is that the UI of this application is very limited, and if we really want to manage the containers to utilize all the potential, and we need so, we need to access our DSM through the terminal. And in order to do so, we need to enable the SSH access. So now let's go to the control panel, we're already there, and go to the terminal and SNMP. And here in the terminal tab, click on this one, enable SSH service. By default, the port is 22, but it's quite a good habit to change it to something that no one knows. I usually use 3535 in my tutorials, so let's have it here as well. Click apply. Now let's click OK, and while it's saving, let's make a note of it. Now, it's a good habit to have SSH access to be disabled at all times unless we need it, like now. So once you're done with this tutorial, I highly recommend you to come back here and disable the SSH access in security reasons. Now we need to create a folder to hold all the files of our Docker containers. If you already have Docker containers running on your Synology NAS and you have a dedicated folder, you can use that one. Otherwise, let's continue. So let's open the shared folder in the control panel, and here we'll create a folder called just Docker. We don't need the recycle bin. Let's click next, next, and here it is. Now it's time to install our package manager or the Docker. Again, go to the package center. Let's move it a bit and search for Docker. And now let's install it. Again, if you have a newer Synology NAS, it will be called Container Manager, so please install that one instead. Let's switch over here. Here it's installing. Okay, and it's installed. Now we need to switch to an SSH client in order to connect to our Synology NAS through the SSH. If you're using a Mac, the SSH client is actually pre-installed in the terminal. So you can just launch the terminal, type SSH space, then the user of your NAS at the IP address of our DSM, and we can check the notes over here. This is the IP address. And because we've set up a custom port, then we'll need to type -p space 3535, this port, and click enter. For the first time, it will ask you to add a fingerprint, so we type yes, and then it will ask us for the password of our user, which we will type in. And then we will see this welcome message. But because I've decided to use the iPad in this video, I will use the Terminus app. So let me drag it over here, click new host, and here we'll create a new host. This will be the Synology NAS, let's give it a name. The IP address, let's switch to our notes once again. This one. Now let's go further. We need this checkbox to be enabled because we need to use SSH. Because we've used the custom port 3535, we need to put it here instead of 22. Then we'll put our username and the password to our Synology NAS. Now, you can keep the password blank and then it will ask you every time for the password once you try to connect, or you can predefine it here and it will save it and you won't need to type it again. So I will type the password and that's it. Let's click save. Now let's connect here. For the first time, it will ask us to accept the fingerprint. Let's continue. And now we are connected to our NAS via SSH. Now let's type this command, ifconfig. It will show us all the network interfaces available to our NAS. We are interested particularly in the network name that has our IP address attached. On your NAS, it will most certainly be either ETH0 or ETH1. ETH stands for Ethernet. Okay, so for us, it's ETH0. So let's make a note on that as well. Let's clear this to start fresh. If you ever connected to a server in Davinci Resolve, you know that we require to use the IP address. We cannot use a URL like geekstable.whatever.com. We have to have an IP address. So now we need to create a virtual network on our Synology NAS so that our future Davinci Resolve server would have a dedicated IP address. Sounds complicated, but actually it's pretty straightforward. Don't be afraid. So let's do that. So again, we need to create a virtual network. In the description to this video, you'll have some code snippets, so you don't have to type everything. And please download them and open them in any text editor of your choice. I will use the code app, and here I will open the folder with my snippets. Again, you will have them in one file. Please find something that looks like this. This is the code that creates a virtual network, and we will need to change it a bit to match our network configuration. So the first line says that we will need to create a virtual network. And here's the important thing, that we need to specify the parent network. And that's why we checked our networks in the previous step. So we made a note that our network is ETH0. So here, instead of ETH2, we need to pass ETH0. Also, we know that our root IP address starts with these three numbers. So we need to copy these three numbers over here. And also copy entire four numbers and replace the gateway. The gateway has to be the exact as your router. Now here again, we need to replace the three numbers. As for the last part, you can put any IP address that you like, which is unoccupied. And again, in the tutorials of the developer, they use 200, so I will use it as well. And this, in the future, will be the IP address of our Davinci server. All right, let's save it, copy the entire code, switch back to our SSH server, post it over here, and click Enter. It will ask us for the password, so let's fill it in. And once we see this line, it means that the operation is completed. So let's switch back to our DSM to check that it's working. Okay, let's click Open our Docker or Container Manager. Go to the network, and here we'll see that we have our studio network running. All right, so now our future server will have a dedicated IP address. Great. Now we need to create some folders for this Davinci Resolve server to be placed in. Again, if we go to the control panel, we've already made sure that there is a Docker folder with all of this. So now we'll need to create a folder inside here for our Davinci Resolve server. Before we do that, note which volume this Docker folder is placed in. For me, it's volume 1. If you have it in volume 2 or 3, please make a note on that. Now let's switch to our SSH client. Let's type clear to start fresh. And here you may copy from the code snippets, but I will just type it right away. So first we need to switch to a different folder. For this we need to type cd, which stands for change directory, then slash, then volume 1. If it was volume 2 or 3 for you, for the Docker folder, just change accordingly, and slash, and then the name of your Docker folder. For me it was just Docker. Click Enter, and now it shows that we've changed the folder and now we are in the Docker folder. Okay, so now let's create another folder. Let's type mkdir, which stands for make directory, and let's call it studio-server. Okay, Now let's change directory to this studio server. For this, we'll need to type again cd./studio server. Click enter. And now let's create a few more folders. It will be backups. It will be jobs. It will be hooks. And it will be database. Be sure that there are no typos here. When you're working with a project, it has to have a time zone, so it could sync all the changes across the clients based on that time zone. And it better be your time zone. So let's go to the Wikipedia page of the time zones and find the one that matches yours. So here let's scroll down to the table, and here we are interested in TZ identifier. So you have to go through this table and find the one that applies to you. You can use search, of course. So this is mine. Once you find yours, also put it into the notes, and then switch to our code snippets. Okay, and now let's tweak this code that will run the studio server. Okay, so first we'll give it a name. I'll name it studio-server. You can give it any name you want. -d flag specifies that whenever we run this script, there won't be any output for us to view. Then we specify that this server will be restarted every time something happens with your NAS. So if you restart your NAS, it will also be restarted automatically. Here we specify the network this container should work with. And this is exactly the name of the network that we gave to the network in our DSM. Let's switch for a moment to check. So in the container manager, here is the name of the network, studio_network. And yeah, here it is, studio_network. Now here is the aforementioned TZ parameter, time zone. So we have the time zone that we need in our notes. Let's copy it and paste it over here. All right. Now I specify the IP address of our studio server, and as you remember, it was like this. And actually, now that I'm typing it, it's a good idea to have a note on that. So, studio server IP will be like this. Next will be the port, and it will be exactly the Davinci port 3 that we used at the very beginning of this video. And it has to be the same. And these two have to be the ports number 1 and 2 that we've used. And below there are 4 folders that we've created, which were hooks, database, backups, and jobs. And if your Docker folder is in a different volume, like volume 2, for example, or volume 3, you have to change all these 4 numbers here. All right, so the rest looks pretty good. So let's copy this code. Go to our SSH client. Let's clear it again and paste it. Okay, it will require our password again. Let's type it in. It will say that it won't find it locally, but now it's taking this image from the internet and tries to build it. It will take some time, so let's wait a bit. Okay, so it seems that it's done. Let's switch to our DSM to check that this image is running. So let's open the container manager or the Docker, go to the container, and see that it's running. All good. Now, if it didn't run for you, so it keeps failing, don't worry. The next step will be the troubleshooting. So we'll try to solve some of common problems. If it did work for you, then congratulations, you may skip the next step using the chapters and go to the next step after troubleshooting. All right, so the troubleshooting. I've been using this Davinci Resolve server for a while now, and the main troubles that I got was because of the wrong network configuration. So we've created the virtual network using this code, remember? So if this parent network changes, or the gateway changes, then it will stop working. And here are 3 examples and a solution to solve them. So the example number one, very unlikely, but can happen. So imagine that your router is accessible by this IP address. We have it in our notes, okay? But then you decide to upgrade your router or upgrade your network configuration, and suddenly your new IP address of the router becomes like this. In this case, everything will stop working because this virtual network was created by these parameters and it still expects the gateway, your router, to be under this IP address. So in this case, if your router changed the IP address from this one to this one, or basically anything, you have to change it over here as well. So you have to change it like this, basically change all the third numbers like this. This is a very uncommon scenario, as I said, because we don't really upgrade our routers and the gateway IP address very often, but it's just good to know and just remember that. Okay, so the second example is more tricky. If we go to the DSM and go to the control panel, to the network interfaces, you'll see that this current Synology NAS has two LAN ports. One is connected, all good. The other one is disconnected, so we don't need that. If we switch to the SSH client, let's clear this up and type our ifconfig, we will see that our IP address, this one, is associated with the ETH number 0, as we put the note of this. Okay, now let's do a simple thing. Let's say that you were cleaning and then you disconnected everything, did your cleaning, and then when connecting, you've connected an Ethernet cable to a different port. So let's see what's happening here. If I switch back to DSM, first of all, you'll have a different IP address. So last time for me it was 223, and the new one will be 224. But more importantly is that if we go to the SSH server, and of course we'll need to change the configuration here, because now we have a different IP address, okay? Once we connect and type ifconfig, we'll notice that the current IP address, the active one, 224, is associated with the ETH1. But the virtual network that we've created relies on ETH0. And because ETH0 is now disconnected, the virtual network will be disconnected as well. So now we'll need to change ETH0 to ETH1, which is associated with the active connected IP address. Now the third example is really crazy. It took me quite a while to realize what's happening. And the issue was with the network configuration as well. So I hope I will save you a few days of headache. So let's switch to newer NAS, this one. So it also has the studio server running. And here let's go to the SSH service and connect to it. And let's type ifconfig. So here we just have one Ethernet port, no problem. So the IP address is this one, it's associated with ETH0. So our network configuration that we have here should work just as fine. All right, now let's switch to DSM. Now don't follow what I'm doing. I'm breaking the things now. So I'm just showing you the example of how to break things. So now everything works fine. But when I go to the package manager and I decide to install Virtual Machine Manager. So let's install it. For some reason, I decide to run some virtual machines. So I'm doing everything just normal, installing the package, nothing special. So I just launch it and go through the setup, nothing special. And I won't even start any virtual machines. I'm just setting up the app. But because it's a virtual machine manager, it messes up with the configuration a little bit. And once we close this window, the studio network will stop working and our Davinci Resolve server will be unreachable. Why? We just installed the app. But if we go to the SSH client again, and note, so this was the old ifconfig. Now we will type ifconfig again. And here we will see something different. So our ETH0 doesn't have our IP address, but our IP address, this 0146, is associated with something new, which is called OVS_ETH0. So again, it returns us to the same problem. Our virtual network is looking for ETH0. It doesn't have our IP address, so our network doesn't work. So what we have to do, we need to replace ETH0 with this OVS_ETH0. So I guess you've got the idea. So we change something in the network, and the virtual network that relies on the initial parameters stops working. So we need to change the settings of our virtual network. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. We have to delete the virtual network and recreate it with the new parameters. It's a pretty easy solution, but not that obvious. I will show you how to fix the second example when we changed the cable, reconnected it from the LAN 1 to LAN 2, but it will apply for all three examples. Okay, so returning back to DSM. As I said, so we go to the network interfaces, and we see what happened. So we disconnected the LAN 1, and now we are connected to the LAN 2. Let's go to our SSH client, and here, as we've checked before, this new active IP address is associated with ETH1 instead of ETH0. Okay, let's go to the code that creates the virtual network, and instead of ETH0, put ETH1. Okay, now let's go to the container manager in our DSM. Let's open it. Go to our containers. Here we need to stop our Studio server, and if you don't have this switch, there will be this action button active where you can click and select stop. Alright, now the container is stopped. Let's go to the network. Here let's go to bridge, click manage, click add, and select our container. In the container manager, in the newer UI, you will see the list of your containers with the checkboxes. So you can just click on the checkbox and select the Studio server. That's the same. Click apply. And now let's go to the Studio network, click manage, and here we need to delete this one. Or in the new UI, you will just uncheck it. Click apply. Now, because this network is not associated with any containers, we made sure that it's associated with the bridge, we can safely delete it. So select the Studio network and click delete. Let's delete it. Alright, now let's go back to the code, copy the new code, which relies now on ETH1, go to the SSH, let's clear this, paste it, put the password, switch back to the DSM. Let's just switch the tabs. And here we have the new network that relies on the new settings. And now let's reverse what we did before. So we click on the Studio network, click manage, click add, select Studio server, or just checkbox in the new UI, click apply, go to the bridge, click manage, and delete the Studio server here, or uncheck the checkbox in the new UI. Click apply. And now we can start the container again. And now we can finally access it with the new settings. All right, so now let's close the tabs that we don't need. And now let's open the new tab. Let's check the Studio server IP, which is this one. Paste it over here. Colon, and here we need to specify the port, which is exactly the second port that we used, 8543. And here we will type 8543. Here we'll see the page that will ask us to configure our Studio server. So here you can put any username and the password. Okay, click done, and we are in the admin console. Now let's quickly check the configuration. Let's specify the access IP, which should be exactly this one. Okay. Everything else looks good. Let's save changes. Now let's go back to the dashboard and create a new database which will store all our projects. Let's name it somehow. NAS Davinci. Let's make some password. I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And let's create it. Let's wait a little bit while it creates all the necessary files and the database. All right, cool. So the database is created. What we need to do now is to click connect. What it will do, it will download the connection file. Okay, download. And if we open it just to check it out, we'll see that it has the IP address, the name of the database, the name of the user, which is the same, and the password. Now, how about we open our Davinci Resolve, go to Home, select the network, click over here, and add a project library. We need to select Connect, and let's specify the name. So it will be our NAS Davinci. The location will be the IP address. Let's switch for a moment, check for a moment. This is the IP address. The user will be also NAS Davinci. And the password will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, let's connect. Allow. Oh yeah, I forgot that it has to be all lowercase. Sorry. Now let's connect it again. And now it's creating the new project library. So here, let's create a new project. Will be test NAS. Let's create it. Now go back to Home for a moment. Do right click here and check this multiple user collaboration. And now this project can be worked on by many users. Let's reopen it again and let's add some media here. Now let's select a few files just to add it here. Okay, and let's create a new timeline. Okay, nice. Let's save it. So next, let me go into full screen because we just need the Davinci Resolve now. Now let's move to our MacBook. So we have our tablet open so that we can see what's happening on the screen. And now let's open the Davinci Resolve on our Mac. Now, in order to connect to the server, we'll have to perform the same operations, which I already did. So you can go to the Davinci server webpage, download the connection file, or just go to the Davinci Resolve, click Add Project Library, click Connect, and specify the same credentials that you specified on the iPad. And then you'll have this NAS Davinci server open, and here we already have our test NAS project. Now, by default, this media will probably be offline. It's because we have it linked on our iPad, but it's not yet linked on our laptop. In order to relink it, you'll have to click on this button, which says Relink Media, and it will be red if something is missing. And then you will specify, let's click, and then you will specify the location of the media. And then it will be linked and it will be accessible like here. So let's open the timeline. As you can see, we have both files over here. Oh, and let's minimize it a little bit. Let me close the media pool. I think it's the maximum that we can go to. All right. So this is our project opened in Davinci on the Mac. And here, let's make it open. Here is the project opened on the iPad. I prefer to enable the Edit tab, so we will see somewhat similar interface. Okay, now let's say that I'm on my iPad and I want to ask my colleague, how is it going with the edit? Let's move it over here for a moment. I click Enter on my iPad, and immediately I see that I have a new message on my laptop. So I click over here, I see the message, And I will reply that everything works just fine. Type enter, and as you can see, we already got this message on the iPad. Cool. So let's close this dialog. We don't need it anymore. We proved that it's working. Good. All right. Now let's go switch to the iPad again. I'll just move it over here, and I will go to the color tab, and let me do something, I don't know, something that will immediately say that we applied some edits. Okay. So let me change the temperature of the first video. Okay, increase the contrast, so it will immediately show that I've applied some changes. Okay, so now as you can see, the project is not saved yet, it shows edited, so I will click save on the iPad. Once I clicked save, so the project is saved, we see that there is this nice refresh button showed on our laptop. It means that this clip has been refreshed by someone on our project. So let's click on it, and we immediately see the applied changes. Looks very nice. If we switch to edit on our tablet, and we will do some, I don't know, simple moving of the timeline on our laptop and click save, then we will see a similar button on our iPad. So let's click refresh, and then we get a refresh timeline. So as you can see, it works in both ways. Now, if you plan to use the same project on different devices, it's very important to have the same version of Davinci on them. Because, for example, I had Davinci 18.6.4 on my Mac and 18.6.6 on my iPad, and basically the collaboration didn't work. It was failing. So do keep your versions consistent. But okay, another scenario. What if I want to access our project on the go, outside of my local network? So if you did the necessary port forwarding during the step 1, then you are good to go. So here I have a different iPad that has a SIM card. So now it's not connected to our local network and to our NAS. As you can see, it's connected to the cellular. So if I would try connecting to our project using our local IP address, then nothing would work. I can try connecting, but it won't show up my projects. So we need to somehow know the external IP address of our NAS. So we can put it over here, and then it should work. How do we know that? If you pay for a dedicated IP address, then I'm pretty sure that you know it already, so you can use it right away. But if you're like me, you're not paying for this extra functionality and your external IP address changes over time, then you need to identify this external IP address every time you need to access your project library on the go. Okay, let's perform a few simple steps. Let's go to our DSM. So here's our DSM. Let's go to the control panel, go to the external access, and go to the dynamic DNS. Now, if you have dynamic DNS set up already, then here, external address, you will see the IP address that you need. We don't have it, so let's set it up. Let's click Add. Here, let's select Synology as our service provider. Here, we can pick any host name that we like. Davinci Geek NAS, whatever. You can select anything here. Click Get a certificate from Let's Encrypt and set it as default. Now, before clicking OK, it's very important that you should authorize with your Synology account here. And if you don't have one, you should create one. And once you authorize, you would also register your device, your Synology NAS, to your account, so they will be bound. All right, let's click OK. Click OK once again and wait a little bit. Okay, we've set it up. Fine, we can use this external address right away, but let's emulate a situation that this address got changed over time and we are already on the go, so we don't have access to our Synology NAS. We are outside. So let's switch to our iPad. Let's minimize it. And again, the iPad is outside of our network. We don't know anything what's happening on our NAS. We don't know anything about what's happening on our Davinci server. We're outside of it. So let's switch to our browser and open the Synology account webpage. Here we are interested in the devices, and you should pick the one that you have. And if we scroll down, we will see our IP address. So again, we are not connecting to NAS, we are just outside of this network and we already know the IP address, so that's good. So what we need to do, we need to copy this IP address, switch to Davinci Resolve, and instead of our location, instead of the IP address that we had, the local IP address, we need to paste this one. All other fields are the same. Now let's click connect, wait a little bit, and we are connected to our project. So we can open it. Of course, we need to relink the media. So here we are working on our project connected over the cellular network. And finally, we got a seamless experience where we can do the work on the iPad and on the laptop, and all the files will be in sync. And that's great. I mean, it's a shame that Apple didn't offer something like this for the Final Cut for the iPad. But well, anyways, I hope you found this tool useful, and if you did, please go to the WireBear's website and consider donating. I think they deserve it. And again, I'm not affiliated with them, so it will be only the developer that you'll be supporting. As for me, I'll be happy if you'll hit a like and consider subscribing. It's been Alex, and see you at the Geeks Table. Bye bye.